And so what we did is we took that exact same testing protocol, the ocular testing portion of that, and we automated it. It runs in the headset. So in-house, Gaize has conducted the world's largest cannabis impairment clinical trial.
Legalization continues to spread across the country. Where are manufacturers and maybe other skilled trade industries least prepared to face that new reality? Hello, and welcome to the Manufacturing Connector. I'm your host, Jim Mayer. If you're new to us, welcome. We talk about technology that can positively impact the future of manufacturing. And today's episode is no different. I've got Ken Fichtler from Gaize AI here with me today. I'm not going to do a wild intro for him because he knows himself better than I know him. So I'm going to let him do that. Before we do that, though, if you haven't checked out our other shows, please make sure you check out Manufacturing Culture Podcast and Work But Make It Human. Those are two shows that tackle very different things than what we talk about here on the Manufacturing Connector. So without further ado, and not to draw anything out longer than I need to, Ken Fichtler, welcome to the Manufacturing Connector. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So Ken, before we dive into these questions and talk about Gaize, introduce yourself, quick bio on you, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so happy to be here. My name's Ken Fichtler. I'm the founder and CEO of Gaize, and what we've built is a real-time test for drug impairment. So that is distinct, of course, from the presence of drugs. We're actually looking for how the body's responding to a substance like cannabis or many other substances. Quick bio on me. I live in Montana. I actually live about 45 minutes north of where I was raised when I was young, and it's great to be back in this area. My wife and I had a child a couple years ago, and we've really enjoyed landing in Missoula and building this company here.
God's country, man. It's gorgeous
up
there.
It's a really special place to be, and raising a child here has brought so many fun memories back of when I was his age and running around the woods.
That's awesome. I love that. And I apologize for butchering your last name there in the intro. That was bad.
Yeah. I've had kind of a weird career. I've had kind of a couple different chapters, I like to say. And so, one was kind of getting into tech entrepreneurship and trying a couple things, having a little success, a little failure. I then spent a handful of years leading marketing for an infrared optics manufacturer. After that, I was recruited by our governor, Steve Bullock, to run economic development for the state, which was kind of a whole interesting departure. That was where I was really exposed to the problem that we have now solved, though. And so not only was that an incredible experience, but it really led me directly to where we are today. So awesome. It's been a fun journey, and can't wait to see where I go next.
Yeah, me either, man. Glad that we are now friends because your trajectory is sky's the limit for you, man. Ken, let's go back to the beginning of Gaize, and I want to know what you saw in industrial safety, or what was lacking in industrial safety that made you create Gaize in the first place.
Yeah. So really, the genesis story here is when I was director of economic development for the state of Montana, I specifically, most people in the administration didn't think cannabis was going to get legalized. I did, and I was right. So I was like, okay, I need to understand what in the world is going to happen if cannabis becomes legal. This is probably an economic boon for the state, but are there externalities I need to be aware of? And so I sort of set off on this mission to understand that. And so I talked with counterparts in states that had already legalized. So Washington State, California, Oregon, Colorado. And so what I really learned was, one, the sky does not fall if you legalize recreational cannabis. It turns out people are broadly responsible and able to function, and nothing, really bad happens. It is an economic boon for the state. So that's been really, I think, a positive thing for most states that have legalized. The one negative externality that I was able to uncover was that businesses and law enforcement didn't have a way to measure impairment at the time. And so that struck me as, an interesting market opportunity for sure, and a big safety risk. I mean, cannabis is an intoxicating substance. We have to understand what that looks like in order to, continue to maintain safe roads.
Hmm.
So that became really an interest of mine. And so I set off then to understand, what does this look like? And I had intended at the time to just make an angel investment into whatever company was going to win. When I started looking around, I found a couple companies focused on this space, not a lot. Honestly, it was just like a handful. And of those that I found, I was not impressed with what anyone was doing. And in fact, some were doing it completely wrong, in my opinion. As an example, at the time, there was a company called Hound Labs that had raised at an astronomical amount of money, over $100 million, and they ended up they were pursuing a cannabis breathalyzer, so looking for the presence of THC in the breath as a way to understand if someone had recently used cannabis. The obvious problem with that, when you start looking at how cannabis actually works in the body, is the presence of THC doesn't really matter. There's no evidence of impairment to be found if you are only measuring THC. Um, in that way, cannabis is very distinct from alcohol, and it turns out most other drugs work in a similar way, where there are binding to receptors in the brain, and so measuring the amount of the substance in the body doesn't tell you anything that's useful. So that really then led me down this path of, okay, what does doing it right look like? And that was how I stumbled upon these tests that law enforcement were using that we've now automated, and figuring out how to extract data from that using our headset, and then figuring out how we could actually derive signal from that data and measure impairment.
And so couple of things here, Ken. I love this because every shop that I've worked with on their culture, they typically have a 5 panel test that they screen their applicants with, and they're eliminating, in states where it's legal, a large portion of the working age population that could be working for them simply because of THC from your typical P test, right?
Yep.
And so I always caution people to get rid of that fifth panel, that THC panel, because you want to open up your doors. You're not trying to catch people who take an edible at night. That's not who you're trying to prevent working for you, right? You're trying to prevent harder drugs from being prevalent in your workplace. You're the common person who uses THC isn't out driving around. They're sinking into a couch eating a bag of Doritos, right? And I tell these shop owners all the time, it, would you hire me? And they say, well, yeah, of course. Well, you couldn't based on your drug testing policy, because I guarantee you I will not be clean when it comes to THC. I take an edible nearly nightly just to help me sleep, and to help with anxiety, right? It's not a massive amount, but I'm sure it's enough to be detected.
Oh yeah.
So, have one of the things that I always hear from these owners is, well, how do we test for it? How do we know that somebody isn't high while they're at work if there's a workplace incident? And it sounds like Gaze is now that technology that can help us get there. Am I capturing that correctly?
Exactly right. Yeah. And so business owners have historically had this dichotomous choice where they can either choose to have a safe workplace. I'm going to put air quotes around that, because a chemical drug test is not going to keep you safe from workplace impairment. But that was the idea. And so you can choose that path, or you can choose to drop THC testing and employ people who use THC. By the way, there's about 22% of the population, according to the federal government, that uses cannabis. And so I don't know of a single business out there that can afford to cut nearly a quarter of the potential workforce from even being considered. That's kind of insane.
Yeah.
But that choice has really been what business owners are faced with. And now they don't have to make that choice. They can have a safe workplace and employ people who use cannabis.
Awesome. So what how has legalization more widely forced leaders to rethink workplace safety programs?
I think fundamentally we work with primarily really large companies. I- Often we're running into operations that have multiple states. They've got therefore multiple sets of drug testing laws they have to deal with, and it just becomes an extremely complicated situation. And then the other thing we found is that often the people who are at the top levels of these businesses are not cannabis users themselves, and so they're trying to understand how do we deal with this problem. Um, and they don't quite understand, I think, the population
Mm,
the same way that you or I do, where these people are, they're broadly good actors. They're using cannabis safely and responsibly. They're not delinquents. They're great employees. We hear from so many construction crews, in fact, that the people who smoke weed on their crews are the best people. They just don't want to do it at work.
right.
It's the ones that are drinking a six pack every night and showing up late. And, there's kind of like it's perhaps stereotypical, but there's a lot of, I think a lot more challenges associated with alcohol abuse than there are cannabis abuse.
Yeah.
And so, really, these businesses are trying to understand how do we integrate this in a responsible manner, because we don't want to get somebody who's got their hand chopped off, we get sued, like that's bad for everybody. How do we do this responsibly? And so that's the challenge that they're faced with, and that's why they're bringing us in.
Awesome. So talk to us about how gaze actually works,
Yeah.
and what happens when somebody's taking the test.
Yeah, let me show you what we've got. So basically, this is the headset. This is where we run all the ocular tests. So headset goes on the head, we run some tests, we capture data using embedded eye tracking sensors, and that data then gets analyzed by both analytical and machine learning models to detect signs of impairment. Um, the testing suite that we chose is the same testing suite that is used by law enforcement drug recognition expert police officers. So
Okay.
these are the officers with the highest level of training. This is not your average patrol cop. These guys go through extraordinarily intensive training. It's very, very challenging. And they have shown a very high level of accuracy at detecting active drug impairment and classifying which substance category it comes from. And so what we did is we took that exact same testing protocol, the ocular testing portion of that, and we automated it, and it runs in the headset. And so the
Wow.
experience is basically someone watches a little red ball move across the screen, at a prescribed rate and speed. And that then mimics the law enforcement doing the, track my finger type tests. There's a bunch of these. There's, the track my finger one that you've seen on TV. That's one of
Hmm.
six that gets done by a drug recognition expert. And they're looking at, not only the how your eyes are moving, but pupil size. Pupil size is strongly predictive of impairment on certain drug categories. Um, and so we are doing the same thing. We're basically measuring the pupil size to 1/100th of a millimeter, so extraordinarily precise. We're measuring the gaze direction to 13 decimal places of radian accuracy. So again, well beyond
Wow.
human level perception. We're capturing both of those pieces of data 90 times per second per eye. So what we get is a really, really large data set. And that then gets analyzed, and we look for the same things that law enforcement look for, but we do it in a completely automated way that is backed by data, completely objective, and backed by test video too. So in the case where we get challenged in court, we've got some human interpretable evidence we can then fall back on.
Wow. So many questions about this, and anybody who's listening who's in precision manufacturing will appreciate the precision at which you're measuring this at. I mean, that's amazing. Do different substances, like my eye following, does it do different things based on different substances that I could be on? So if I were on cannabis, it's one thing, methamphetamine, my eyes are doing a different thing, and you are able to tell which substance I have in my system based on that alone?
Yes, down to the substance category level. So substance
Wow.
categories are like CNS depressants, CNS stimulants, cannabinoids, alcohol. We've got dissociative anesthetics, psychedelics. Um, that's kind of the broad categories, right? And so we can figure out with good precision what category someone is being impaired by. Getting deeper than that, most of the substances within each category behave very similarly. And so we can't get deeper than that at this point, at least. Uh,
Sure.
But, as a good example, opiates and stimulants work basically completely on, they're kind of two sides of the spectrum. So stimulants are going to cause very blown out pupils, erratic, jittery eye movement. Opiates are going to cause very sluggish eye movement, very constricted pupils. There's lots of other indicators for both of those, but that's kind of an easy way to think about it. So that allows us to, based on what we're seeing, hone in on the substance category that's causing the impairment.
How long does the test take? Like if I were to have a workplace incident and my employer says, "Okay, Jim, put on the headset." Is it a minute? Is it 10 minutes? How long is the test?
The headset is being worn for about 5 minutes, and then we have
Okay.
about 30 seconds of data analysis that happens. And so we always tell our customers in the course of 6 minutes, you'll have an answer.
Wow. And so 6 minutes. That's wild. I sorry, I had another follow-up question to that, but that's really fast because you can take action on the floor almost immediately or HR office almost immediately if there's an incident or if there's a supposition, I guess, of impairment
Yeah.
with an employee.
Yeah. I mean, the time differential between doing the gaze test and doing a chemical drug test is really the key driver of ROI for our customers. As an example, you can have somebody who bumps a forklift into a pallet of goods and they go back to the office, they get a gaze test, they're back on the floor in 10 minutes. You do that same process for a chemical test, either you've got somebody coming on site, which is going to take an hour at least, or you've got that person going off site to a clinic, which is again going to take a whole bunch of time. And then you've got to wait for results. If it's non-negative, you've got that person sitting on the sidelines for at least a week. We've got
Wow.
an answer in less than 10 minutes. So that person can move into whatever the right process is or get back to work very rapidly. And so that allows our customers to not only save a lot of time, of course, and then save the cost of drug testing in many cases. So there's a really easy ROI advantage to deploying technology like this.
Is there a challenge or when it comes to tech or the environment to having repeatable and reliable results from this out on the floor?
No, the test is performed exactly as it's supposed to be every single time. So there's none of the human variability you would get with an officer performing these tests. Um, the system is really designed to elicit signs and symptoms of impairment that are involuntary. And so it's not as though your second time through you're going to get better at it. You're still going to exhibit the same things. And
Right.
uh, it's really a great system from that perspective. If you ever have a suspicion, you can also just run another test. It doesn't take that long, and
Sure.
that allows you to get to an even higher level of confidence that you're sure on what's happening.
Is there anything, I mean, and without giving away your secret sauce here, what's behind the science, right? That makes this so defensible out on the floor? Was there somebody you collaborated with on the science part, not necessarily the law enforcement part?
Yeah, so I mean, to give you a little backstory here, these tests were originally developed in the 1980s by Los Angeles Police Department, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and an ophthalmologist named Carl Sitek, Dr. Carl Sitek. And so Dr. Carl Sitek is still around. He actually has one of our headsets, and we have worked with him throughout the course of this to just get his feedback, make sure we're doing things properly. There are a number of other people that we've consulted with in the course of building this, and so kind of foundationally, we built on top of a lot of 45 years of history of use. Um, Quite a lot of scientific trials that have validated that these tests are effective at detecting drug impairment. And then we built on top of that with primary research as well. So in-house, Gaize has conducted the world's largest cannabis impairment clinical trial. That was
Wow.
kind of our foundational trial to show, yeah, this thing is effective, and here's a whole bunch of data that proves it. So we did that. We did a similar study for alcohol, wrapped that up late last year. And then we also just wrapped up a trial for edibles. And so for the members of the audience that may not know, smoked cannabis and edible cannabis have different metabolic pathways in the body. So we wanted to validate both. And now we have conducted both of those trials. The edible data is still being processed at this point, but we are certainly going to be effective at detecting impairment from that as well.
Can people find that those results on your website?
Yeah, so all these trials are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. We are
Okay.
entering peer review on the first two, and so those results will be published, I hope, soon. This process takes a long
Wow.
time. And then for the edibles trial, I would guess we're still, as I said, in data analysis mode. So I would guess it's going to be a couple of months yet of looking at that and crafting the paper and all that stuff. But that was conducted actually in partnership with a university, University of Saskatchewan, and so they are also, I'm sure, going to be crafting a paper on this, and so yeah, results will be available for all this.
That's awesome. Um, do you have any stories of where Gaze has helped a company change how they handle safety and compliance?
Yeah, many.
Pick your
My
favorite.
favorite stories, I think, are the ones where we save jobs, not the ones where we eliminate them.
Yeah.
So a good example would be we recently deployed into one of the largest construction general contractors in the country, one of the very top two couple, or very top couple. And the very first day of their deployment, they did a random drug test. So that was their old policy, right? We do drug tests to try to keep the workplace safe. So they did one of those. They found two people who were positive for THC. One was a manager. Um, Under the prior process, those people would have been terminated. Under the new process with Gaize, we were able to test them, prove that they were not impaired at the time of being at work. And so both of those people kept their jobs, which saved this company $70,000 in hiring, firing, recruiting, training costs in day one. So that
Wow.
that location is in strongly positive ROI territory instantly. I love stories like that, and we get those, not infrequently. Our customers are broadly adopting this technology not to be, not to catch people, but to enable their employees to make, responsible decisions and use cannabis on their personal time. We constantly hear, "Hey, we don't care what people do on the weekend. We just want them safe and ready to work."
Yeah.
So those kind of stories are the ones that I love. We've got all manner of other ones, including catching people who are high on novel synthetic benzodiazepines that they had ordered off the internet and thought they were Xanax. There was not Xanax. They were some other chemical, and so we caught the impairment, and that was kind of the cause of it. I mean, there's a lot of things that people are doing to try to cheat drug tests that would have historically worked and now don't with Gaize. Synthetic urine is a huge problem in the kind of classical urinalysis testing world. There are emerging products to help with saliva test, help you pass a saliva test. There are products that are supposed to strip drugs out of your hair. So, I mean, there's a ton of different ways that people can go about trying to cheat these things. And Gaize is great and unique in that you're putting it on the person's head when they're right in front of you, and you're getting data instantly. You're getting an answer instantly, and there's no opportunity to cheat the system.
Yeah.
So it's a cool test from that perspective too.
I love it. How do the humans on the floor react when Gaze is brought into the facility?
It's a great question, and one that I was frankly nervous about when I started this. Are people going to think this is Terminator coming to get them or something? But it's really
Right.
been pretty good. As long as the employees are communicated to about this, it's a huge advantage to them, and they appreciate their employer moving in a direction of actual fairness rather than trying to take action for some decision that they made over the weekend.
Yeah.
Um, so, what we do is a lot of change management stuff. We have posters that go up, emails that go out. We've had an employee web page is dedicated to help employees understand what's going on. And when all those are used, the employees are really excited. In fact, they're coming to their employer often and saying, "Hey, I want to smoke weed. It's legal in my state. how am I going to keep my job? And so then the employer is out trying to find a solution, and they find us. But that's, we've never had a problem with employees revolting or anything like that. It's just never happened. And in fact, unions, we also get the union question. Unions have been
Yeah.
really supportive of this as well because they want their members to get fair treatment. And so
Yeah.
we enable that.
That's awesome. Um, how do people feel? I mean, have you ever had an instance where somebody felt like this was an invasion of privacy, right? Like this is a very intimate thing, not that your analysis isn't, and that part of the process, but this is instant. This is in front of somebody. Is there privacy concerns that go along with this at all?
Yeah, I mean, privacy is a big concern for us. At Gaize, we don't capture any personally identifiable information, so we have no ability. With from our data set, you cannot figure out who an individual was.
Okay.
What a company is doing is they're entering an employee ID number when they're doing a test, and so we have no ability to correlate that employee ID number back to an employee or anything like that. So we're privacy kind of focused from the ground up, and we don't want to store anything that is considered personally identifiable. So that's kind of phase zero for us. We want privacy to be a policy from the start. Um, what we're capturing is not it's not a scan of the retina or a scan of the cornea. This is not a fingerprint. This is eye movement, pupil size. These are things that you expose to the public every time you walk outside. So once they see the test, they see what we're capturing, it's not really a concern. It is a concern when we start talking to them and they want to know, what is this capturing? Why am I being told I need to have my eyeballs scanned? It's really not that. This is not dissimilar to like looking at a video camera from an inch from your eyeball.
Got it. Roger that. Um, Cannabis, other substances, as we've seen in Washington State and other places now, are becoming legalized
Mhm.
at a clip that I haven't seen in my life, right? And as that legalization continues to spread across the country, where do where are manufacturers and maybe other skilled trade industries least prepared to face that new reality?
We commonly see them least prepared in states that are still cannabis illegal, and so the Carolinas jump to mind, or Indiana as well. We've got companies in both, and they have broadly not understood how to deal with the idea of legal cannabis. Um, Companies in states that are already legal kind of get it already. They're like, we've got to solve this problem. We're either firing people unnecessarily or limiting our workplace or population that we can hire from. So it's kind of those that are, and I'll say rural too, tend to be less prepared somehow than
Okay.
urban. I think they just see less drug use as a
Hmm.
function of where they are. And so, yeah, it's typically those kind of states. But when a state does tip over into recreational legalization, there's often this sky is falling moment where hospitals are suddenly seeing old people that tried weed for the first time in 40 years, and wow, it's stronger than it used to be. There's businesses that are saying, oh, I sky is falling, I have no idea how to check for cannabis, my employees never smoked weed before and now they want to. uh, Law enforcement does the same thing, but it all settles out in the end. um,
Okay.
I think fundamentally what needs to get out there more, and where I get frustrated with the media, is they've got this trope that they love to repeat, that there's no way to check for impairment from cannabis, and that's
Right.
fundamentally untrue. We exist. We have several competitors that exist. There's a whole space, and some huge companies are using these products. We've got dozens of Fortune 500 companies that are using our product. We've got competitors that have, dozens of additional Fortune 500s using their products. And so this idea that there's no way to check for impairment is factually untrue. So I keep hoping the media will update their talking points at some point, but not yet.
Probably not. Um, do you think that policy is moving faster than technology, or is one, or are they moving at the same pace?
Historically, I would have said yes. I mean, California and Colorado have been legal for close to 20 years at this point. So yeah, we
Yeah,
had a big chunk of time there where policy was certainly outpacing the technology to maintain safety. I've always been a little bit surprised that the cannabis legalization effort was so successful prior to this category of technology existing. Um, when we talk to government officials, impairment is the thing that they are most worried about. They don't,
mm,
there's some grandstanding that happens for sure, but mostly they're not concerned so much with moralizing. They want to keep the state or the country safe. And
right.
so the ability to do that and actually detect impairment is really kind of fundamental to that. And so yeah, I mean, it has, I think. What's interesting is that now we do have the technology. And I think, we'll see what happens with the federal government. There keeps being this conversation around moving to Schedule 3. And I would expect that to pass. Definitionally, cannabis does not fit within Schedule 1. There are
Sure.
medical uses. There's not a high potential for abuse. Um, it just doesn't fit. The facts do not support that schedule classification. And so I would expect that to happen, but the feds are not, beating down my door yet to figure out how to solve the impairment problem. We're going to them and
Sure.
trying to open doors and figure this out. But it's funny to have policy advancing theoretically, but not there's not a conversation about how do we solve the impairment problem yet. I think
Yeah.
nationally happening.
With a background like yours, what have you learned from introducing such a sensitive innovation, right? So responsibly. I mean, what have you learned throughout this process with the background that you shared with us earlier?
So much, honestly. I thought perhaps naively at this point that law enforcement would be beating down our door to get this technology. And we spent actually the first, 8-10 months of the company trying to sell to law enforcement, thinking like they have the most acute need. There's research that came out that shows that officers using the standardized field sobriety test, which is the standard kind of
Mm.
roadside battery of tests,
Yeah.
have a 49% false positive rate when they're faced with cannabis impairment. So the idea that we're enabling officers to make arrest decisions on a flip of a coin is insane to me, I think. And so
Absolutely.
either there needs to be better training or they need better technology, perhaps both. We would love to support that, but it has been a very difficult road to sell into law enforcement. We've had a little bit of luck there, but we're not doing statewide deployments at this point. And I think that there really needs to be some legislative effort probably to reevaluate the space and understand how can we actually treat people fairly. Because what's happening today is objectively unfair. And I don't care if you're a cannabis user or not a cannabis user. Nobody deserves to be arrested for using what we've decided is a legal substance on their personal time.
Yeah.
And so, functionally, what's happening today in law enforcement is that someone who uses cannabis, even occasionally, is always illegal to drive in states that have established some limit for the amount of THC that can be in the body. And examples for those states are Washington, Colorado, Montana, Ohio, I think West Virginia now. There's a handful. And the other states have done, nothing. And so there's really not a good cannabis impaired driving enforcement process out there right now, I'll say. And we really need to fix that, I think, urgently. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who have been falsely arrested for cannabis impaired driving. And there's a lot of people who drive while impaired who are not being arrested because there's no way to check for it. So it's kind of bad on both sides.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to my earlier point, I very rarely in my life have gotten behind the wheel of a car after smoking a joint or taking an edible, right? I know they affect differently in different metabolic rates, as you shared
Mm.
with us earlier, but I have gotten behind the wheel after a couple of cocktails and shouldn't have, right? And I think that that's a, going back to your media talking points. I find that people get behind the wheel of a car more, and just anecdotally from my experience, after consuming a couple of drinks versus consuming cannabis in some shape or form. But your device, Gaze, can be used for either. I
Yeah.
mean, cannabis or alcohol. So to me, that's a no-brainer for a police department to have a headset in their vehicle, because then in under 10 minutes, you know if this person's currently impaired or not.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not even to mention, you mentioned so many other drugs are being legalized in certain places. You look at, the Denver metro area has legalized, I believe, everything. Oregon ran an experiment where they legalized everything. And that's not to say that, legalizing necessarily changes the usage patterns. I don't know that that data is super clear, but what is clear is that we need a way to, protect the roads against impaired driving. Bad actors
Yeah.
exist, you
Right.
know, and there's no real argument that they don't. So we have to be able to, I think, maintain the safety of society as kind of a fundamental like baseline for doing these
Absolutely.
things. Um, I just don't think that the impaired driving enforcement conversation is progressing nearly at the pace of the legalization conversation.
Yeah. Ken, what's next for Gaze? Is there a version 2.0 or a bright new frontier for you? What's next?
Yeah. A couple things. One is we're going to continue doing primary research into impairing substances. So, I mentioned that we've done a bunch of research in process today. We have a clinical trial investigating psychotropic prescription drugs. We're also pulling together trials for fentanyl, or really all, I'll call it illegally consumed opioids, and then stimulants like meth. So this is going to be done in partnership with law enforcement, where we're going to get real access to street drug users, which is very, very difficult to do.
Wow.
So that is a really exciting trial that we're pulling together. We're also going to be investigating fatigue. Fatigue is not built into the product today, but there are ocular indicators of fatigue, and so we want to build out those and be able to recognize that. Fatigue can be, incredibly impairing as well.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't remember the stat exactly, but it's something like 24 hours awake is equivalent to a zero point zero 0.08 BAC. So it is very impairing to be fatigued, and there's a lot of completely rational reasons for that. But you still shouldn't be operating equipment that day, perhaps. So
Yeah.
that's another path we're going to look at, and then investigating drug combinations is another. There are commonly used combinations that can produce somewhat unique effects. So cannabis plus alcohol, alcohol plus cocaine. We've all heard of the speedball. I don't know that we're going to study that one, but there's a bunch of things that are that can cause somewhat unique effects. And we want to be able to recognize those common combinations as well. So that's
Wow.
another direction we're moving.
I mean, there's so many great documentaries about professional athletes that were on drugs. I wish you had access to some of them and their heyday to get some of that clinical data. Anyway, those are just a random thought that came to my head. When you think about safety, specifically in manufacturing and skilled trades, what gives you hope for the future of safety in these skilled trades?
I think that broadly the safety folks that we talk to are really looking at their safety programs with open eyes and recognizing that there are clear risk factors that they can be controlling for. And I know that I've got a sample bias here, where the people we're talking to are investing in camera systems to monitor traffic, and vehicle monitoring systems, and um, telemetrics and things like that, to try to help their employees not get stress injuries. But I really am impressed with the kinds of things that we're seeing and the innovations that are coming out in safety. I think we're one small piece of the puzzle. There are many others, and broadly, I think that uh, when deployed appropriately, we can really make a really significant impact on how safe an organization is. I mean, we see both sides, I guess, too. We also see organizations that have just had trouble. So they've just had somebody have an accident or was found using drugs in the on site, something like that, and they're now panicked and they want to fix the problem. And the other side, we've got the very proactive companies that are coming to us saying, "Hey, we want to look at this technology. We think this is a good next step for our drug-free workplace program." So, I have a lot of hope for the future. I think that as the cost of a lot of these things comes down too, so that more and more companies can afford them, that can make a really massive impact. Obviously, we and these other AI technologies are in sort of early days, and so along with that, I think there's always this, at least perceived constraint on price for us. At least it's not real. When you look at the cost of, how many drug tests you're saving, the time savings, stuff like that, we produce incredible ROI, but there is, a different cost to be
Yeah.
considered. So I think that as these things mature and get deployed into the marketplace, we're going to see real impacts in safety. It's I go to a lot of safety conferences, and it seems like the people that are going to those, at least, are highly engaged and doing a great job for their organizations.
Awesome. Um, I got two more questions for you. First, who should reach out to you? What kind of, manufacturers? You talked about, larger construction companies, larger firms, um, 50-person machine shop. Is that part of who you can help with Gaze?
Yeah, I think, we can help pretty much anyone. And our the cost of running our system is about the same cost as doing a couple drug tests a month. So it's not that big. What I think a company of that size should be thinking about is, how can we improve or reduce the amount of time that's spent on these sort of incidents? And if we're doing, even a couple a year, you're in positive ROI territory.
Sure.
Uh, and so I think, 50, maybe 100 for sure. You're definitely going to have enough incidents in the course of a year where you're going to see positive ROI. We typically have, for some reason, found ourselves working with very large companies. So we work with, an automotive OEM, a bunch of tier
Hmm.
one automotive suppliers, some of the top steel companies in the country, huge food manufacturers. So there's, I think at scale, those companies are the ones that are like, okay, we had 2,000 incidents last year. How do we get that down to 1,500 this year? And so
Yeah.
the scale is just so huge that, you can start to really realize some immense savings by deploying safety technologies like ours. Um,
And does it work for like pre-job screening, pre-employment screening, as well as like that workplace incident type issue?
yeah,
Because it sound Yeah, go ahead.
well, there's probably two categories of screening that we think about. One is proactive and one is reactive. So the proactive are like pre-employment screening, random screening before the start of shift, and the reactive is reasonable suspicion, post-incident, things like that.
Got it.
So, a lot of most companies, I'll say, that come to us are currently doing reactive screening, and so they are trying to figure out, how do we save someone's job who is using cannabis and did, they had a whoopsie on the floor and now we've got to test them. Where we see a lot of value is in the proactive testing, where you're creating a very strong deterrent effect against showing up to work while high. And so that really allows for a company to move in a direction that I think is super exciting from a safety perspective. Now people can have a high degree of certainty that the people next to them are not impaired, and they're not going to show up to work if they can be detected. And so it really, that can be a massive ROI driver as well. On the pre-employment side, I always think it's a bit of an intelligence test more
Yeah.
than anything else. Can you show up to work your first day not high? Yeah, it gets used in that way, but it's it's always a bit funny to me that there's anyone who doesn't pass that one.
Right. Absolutely. Um, all right, Ken, last question. What haven't I asked you that you want to share with the audience?
Oh gosh, I would say overall, if this is interesting, there's a bunch of good resources out there on our site, on some of our competitors' sites that talk about a lot of, scenarios that you might be curious about. So, how do we deal with a presumptive positive cannabis test? What do we, what policy gets used when you deploy impairment detection, things like that. So there's a lot of information out there that I think can answer a lot of questions. Um, you know, f- I would love for people to just reach out and have a conversation with us. Always happy to do that. And, we're not a big high pressure sales organization or whatever.
Uh,
Yeah, we're pretty friendly. So
what's the website, Ken?
it's gaize.ai, GAIZE.ai.
All right. And do you have a contact me form on there,
We
or
do.
should they
Yeah.
reach out via
Yeah.
LinkedIn? What's the best way to get a hold of
Yeah.
you?
LinkedIn's great. My direct email is ken@gaize, GAIZE.ai. Happy to answer any questions that way as well.
Awesome. Ken, this was a great conversation. Um, when you reached out, when we had our pre-interview, I knew that this was technology that I had to talk more about because, again, I use cannabis. Sometimes it's CBD, sometimes it's THC.
Mhm.
But I'm a small business owner and I have a massive amount of anxiety nearly daily, and that helps me with that, and it helps me be a more even keeled person. And there, I see it all the time in factories and shops that I walk into where they're limiting the population that can come work for them because of a plant that grows in the ground, and is like, to your point earlier, widely recognized as a legal substance. And in a day and age where we are, as an industry, struggling to get every body we can through our doors, we need to not eliminate a portion of the population because of a plant. We need to open it up. And I think your tech here helps companies employ people who use THC and cannabis products safely. So I appreciate you for inventing this product, or coming up with this product and putting it on the market. I appreciate you for being on the show. You're just a good human being. So thanks for being here today, Ken, and appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Folks, you've been listening to the Manufacturing Connector, where we talk with the people moving manufacturing forward through tools, technology, and real world solutions. See you next time.